Good afternoon and welcome to Stop the Press. Stop the Press! Bill just said we need someone to say stop the press loud.
I agree.
So I've just done it.
Stop the press.
So you can, our droves of listeners can get in touch and tell us whether they like Stop the Press or not. Or they could if we had an email address which they could get in touch with. I keep thinking to myself I should set up an email address and I keep forgetting to do it.
Do you think that's a better idea than having Stop the Press at the end of our theme tune?
Yeah, think of it's a bit more useful.
Inbound channel for communication.
Yeah, a bit more useful. Right, so I'm here with Nick Copson, who is ex-head of marketing for various newspapers for 20 plus years, and Bill Martin, who was 35 years in the regional press, 20 years editor for both evening and morning titles. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon.
And we are recording, so that everyone knows, on 17th of November in the afternoon. So we're going to do a news one. Which one did we decide to do first? News one or the...
No, you're the boss.
Well, do the news one first.
Okay.
So we're going to do a catch-up on lots of news stuff.
That's the one that Nick hasn't prepped for.
That's fine.
Thanks, Rob. That's not what we agreed
Again.
beforehand. Literally 5 seconds ago. But let's go with it.
I'm a 58-year-old man. You can't rely on my memory. So we're going to do a catch-up on the news because of the BBC and Trump edit on Panorama. We think that it's a very... important story that we should be covering, and basically BBC bias generally, because they've since the Trump edit program there's been a report that has accused them of pretty heavy bias in terms of pro-trans lobby and indeed on Gaza as well. So I think that it's very important that we kind of talk about it and see where we are in the process. So guys, first and foremost, what did we think of the Trump edit?
Well, I think, like all this is in context, let's remember that the Panorama Trump edit, the controversial Trump edit, went out, a year ago?
Just before the presidential election,
Just
wasn't
before the presidential election. So I think at the time, what do we think of it? Well, not much. And particularly as it was an edit of a speech that was given 4 years prior to that.
Yeah.
So I think, no one really noticed at the time, did they? Which was probably a bit of more of a concern for Panorama for different reasons. But, it's now that it's come out, sparked by a leak to the Telegraph, I think, from that report you've mentioned already, Rob. I mean, it's just a poor bit of journalism, isn't it? In my opinion, it's unnecessary. It's a bit sloppy, and fundamentally not needed. I can't really get my head round it.
No, neither can I. I was saying, we were talking about it in work, and I was saying that my students wouldn't do that. It's almost like number one lesson that they do is don't show political bias, and you can show bias by the edit. And it just seems really odd that it's even happened, and then even more odd that it's got to pass the editing process.
It makes you think it must have been deliberate.
Yeah. It does feel like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
But I mean, then it becomes even more crass because
there's nothing to be gained from it, is there?
Well, nothing.
No, exactly.
Well, nothing other than what's happening now, which is their reputation going down the pan.
But it seems to have lifted the lid of all sorts of internecine politics that's going on within the BBC.
Yeah.
Which we're not party to. I can't even believe what we've read or what I've listened to in terms of various sort of expert analysis and that thing. But there seems to be some sort of battle going on between the board and some news chiefs. There's clearly some unhappiness in newsrooms about the sort of angles they're taking and that sort of stuff. I guess large media organisations have always had that sort of pressure, from one side. From the board, the chairman's company or whatever. Putting pressure on the editors and that sort of stuff. But in the BBC, it seems to have lifted the lid on a real sort of nest of vipers and all sorts of not very edifying behaviour within the BBC, which is a shame because it's, in my view, because it's colouring a lot of. The great institution that the BBC is, and a lot of the good work it does, is now, we got Donald Trump now saying I'm going to sue the BBC for $1 billion.
It
the
does,
BBC are liars.
It does feel
It's
that...
outrageous.
I know. It feels that BBC have always had problems, haven't they? Historically, by some of their celebrities and stars, and the people on their roster, going off piste, or some of the reporting has been wayward sometimes. But it feels like there's a lot happening right now. It feels like there's a lot in a small space of time, and ultimately the DG is gone, and the news head honcho has gone also. So the right people have stepped down, but it's come at a really bad time for the BBC because their charter is up, and Rob will tell me when it is up, but it is soon.
Rob won't, but it is soon.
Well, hopefully someone
it's 2027, I think.
Yeah, so it's come at the wrong time, and the licence fee payers are exiting. So I feel like there's a real triangulation of pressure going to come up on the BBC very now and into the future, and even more so with Trump. And I suspect Trump will get nowhere with his lawsuit, of course, but it will put even more of a spotlight on what the BBC.
He's not got a reputation to defame anyway.
Well, they've got to prove actual malice as well, and whether it can be proved that the BBC did it through malice is a difficult one. I mean, you've just said, and I'd probably agree, that it must have been done on purpose, but that is a summation, and it's very difficult to conclude that they've done it with a sense of malice towards Donald Trump.
Well, and I'm not sure that he would succeed in proving that they've lowered his reputation or defamed his reputation.
Well,
especially as he won the election.
It didn't affect the election.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think I'd also heard that there's no proof that actually... Well, I don't think there's any evidence that the programme was even broadcast in America in the first place.
It wasn't.
So...
Yeah, so I can't see... to be honest, it's just Donald Trump
I think he's trying to deflect from the Epstein situation.
But what it's done...
God sent to him,
exactly.
Isn't it?
But what it's done, the BBC are now going to be in press conferences in America, and they're going to be, we're not having a question from you because you're a left-wing liberal bias.
Correct.
And so, where does that leave them as a reporting organisation? And, the next question that goes on from it is, does the BBC have a left-wing liberal bias? What do you think?
Well, I don't think it does, but it's clear that there are some, like any large organisation, there are some people within it that do. And if you think where the BBC probably draws most of its young journalists from, I guess they're coming from graduates,
nice, lovely middle-class backgrounds,
correct,
with liberal parents who believe in liberal values, etc., etc.
And I think that's been highlighted, isn't it? There was definitely a report, I can't remember how long ago now, when it said that BBC didn't have enough regional accents on it. There's sort of.
But then they've now have regional accents, but it's just regional accents from nice middle class people who believe in liberal values. It's like the whole place is riven with it.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, you think the world is riven with left-wing liberal values, don't you?
Well, it is.
Yeah. Well,
and generally speaking, that's okay. But when it gets to the point where it overrides any sort of debate or equality, diversity of opinion, then it becomes a problem. It's a nice thing that we're moving in a more progressive direction as a general rule. But when it's like at the expense of everybody else's opinion and everybody else is told they must shut up or they're racist or whatever because they don't believe in those things, then we have a problem.
Yes, but that's more a reflection of society, isn't it? And the BBC, like the media is always a reflection of the society that it's existing in. And the BBC reflects that. There are not many of us, who in any sort of circle now want to take on trans issues, are there?
No.
Without getting shouted at. Mm. Not many of us want to enter the debate around Israel and Gaza. Do you know what I mean?
Because, I know that celebs, the moment the Israel-Gaza thing started, I know that any celeb that came out as saying, well, I empathise with Israel, irrespective of whether they were referring to October the 7th, immediately drew massive vitriol from the online liberal idiots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does, it does appear, doesn't it, that the BBC has been, from what I've read in the last video, doing my prep for this podcast, is that there has been a powerful lobby group within the BBC around
LGBT rights and stuff.
trans issues.
And it became that the Stonewall way of looking at things was the way you should
only
look at
way.
it.
Yeah.
Which was entirely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, hence you end up with a newsreader who rolls her eyes when she has to say pregnant people and then corrects it and says
Yeah.
women.
And then she gets told off for having rolled her eyes, and that's showing an opinion on air. But if someone's written pregnant people, that is an opinion. That is 100% an opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Pregnant women would be the only way of wording it that doesn't say that there's an opinion there.
It also appears, doesn't it, that there's a different sort of political pressure coming from the top of the BBC, which it is probably coming from the other side of the political agenda, and is quite, and is looking at complaints of left-wing liberal bias in reporting and that sort of stuff. And from the stuff I was reading over the weekend, it seems that there's a couple of individuals within the board or who are working for the board who are, certainly dancing to a more right-wing tune.
It's not coming through in their coverage, though, is it?
No, and I think that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point of those people.
But this is how the BBC should be running, really, isn't it? You're right, Bill. You're not going to get naturally neutral political bias amongst any individual, really, certainly in the UK, right? You're going to be slightly left or slightly right, if not extreme left or right. So the BBC are employing these people. Some will be slightly left-leaning, some will probably right-leaning. But the Director General and the people at the very top of all the various functions should be then driving down the neutral position, right? And obviously, it's bound to come off piece sometimes. It's bound to go left and right of something, and clearly that's what's happening. And the people at the top have stood down because of that, which is the right thing, absolutely the right thing.
I think so. I still wonder whether the right people have been stood down.
Yeah, when you said it earlier, I wasn't so sure about that. It feels to me that the right people. It's more a case of the people.
I mean, who was in charge of Panorama?
A bit more middle management type people.
But you've got to have an organisation at the BBC. You've got to have ultimate accountability and culpability, and those are those people. It's very rare that the head of Panorama is going to stand down and fall on their sword, whoever that person is. It's got to be the person who's driving the culture, ultimately, a political culture.
Yeah, but the head of that programme, whether it be Panorama or not, where something as bad, as the Trump edit has happened, that thing might be stood down.
They might be stood down.
Might not be someone falling on the sword.
It'll be ushered.
You might just get sacked.
Of course they would. Yeah. And you might hear about it. You might not. I don't know.
That would seem quite normal to me.
It would seem normal, but ultimately, what's happened here is such a massive, worldwide political kind of scandal. Essentially, it will get even worse now, of course, and Trump will make it even worse. Tim Davie had to go.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't think getting rid of the DG is going to be something that changes the culture at the BBC. What's going to change it is a recruitment process, and it is about more working class voices. It's about being able to, in a newsroom, say, no, that's not right, without being cast aside as being a racist or being homophobic or being transphobic. And apparently, from what I'm reading, no one felt able to challenge any of those views of the liberal predominant people because they felt like the moment they did, they would be up in front of HR.
Well, you say that, it won't change the culture of BBC, but ultimately, a new Director General and also a new boss of news, whoever that person was, will help change that culture. Of course they will, because people naturally react to leadership.
It'll be their job now, isn't it?
Of course it is, yeah.
So do we think ultimately this might actually be a good thing for the BBC, in that it might be the kick up their arse that they needed to actually change, rather than say that they're changing?
Well, if the BBC is going to survive, then it has to be, doesn't it? It has to be the turning point around things like this. Is it a good thing for the BBC? It's hard to see a lot of good out of that.
Sometimes you have to have something go horribly wrong in order to enforce change.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the moment something's gone horribly wrong, and it's time for them to think, we actually do have to do something about this bias now. Because whichever way you look at it, there is a left-wing liberal bias coming out of the BBC at the moment. Every baddie on every drama show is the corporate bloke who runs a business.
Yeah, or a journalist.
Or a journalist, or someone in the church. It's like every single time. I mean, if that's not a bias, then then I don't know what is a bias. You know,
The thing is, it's not just the bias, though, is it? I mean, that's part of it massively, right? But it's also about how what service is the BBC delivering in the future, and whoever's now the Director General is going to have to carry that through now.
yeah.
And it's a time of pivotal change, not only in the culture of the BBC, but what their provision is. So the timing is probably about right, strangely enough. Regardless of why or how it's happened, the timing is probably right.
So yeah, fair enough. I was looking at some of the figures of the people who work for the BBC. They've got inclusivity targets, obviously, and broadly they're in line with the population, but their LGBTQ target is 8% of their working population, and the actual population of Britain is 3.8% LGBTQ. Why is their target not 4% and not 8%? That in itself will create a left-leaning liberal bias, won't it?
Possibly.
And so they are actually targeting their staff to be left-leaning liberal bias.
Says Mr. Chadwick.
Yeah, well, you know,
Yeah,
I looked it up, and I thought it was quite an interesting statistic.
I don't think
you're going to do that.
I don't think I agree with that. Well, I don't know whether or not. I don't think the BBC is targeting left-wing liberal bias in its recruitment policy. I really don't think that. It may well be targeting diversity targets. You know, I get that. You know, it's a different thing, but I can't see the two things as being joined up.
Do you think that they've made the mistake of thinking diversity is about the diverse population of their workforce and who we see on the television, as opposed to diversity of opinion?
Possibly, you know, and none of us work inside the BBC, so I don't think we know the answer to that question. But I think, you know, in any form of positive discrimination, you know, where you're actually recruiting on the basis of trying to hit targets, it's not a perfect situation, is it?
No, absolutely not.
You remember when, you know, South African sports teams were positively discriminated to make sure they had the right number of mixed race or black players within those teams, blah, blah, blah. Did that end up with players who should have been in the team not being in it? Probably.
Yes.
Did it end up with people who shouldn't have been in the team or probably weren't quite good enough to be in the team being in the team? Yes, it did, I would have thought, in all sports. But, you know, 20 years down the line, maybe that sort of policy, you know, they've now, South Africa's moved on a bit, hasn't it? Or it appears to have done in terms of its sport and that sort of thing. And maybe those positive discrimination targets back then did a job.
Arguably.
Yeah.
Arguably. Yeah. So what are the repercussions going to be for the BBC? What do we think is going to come out of all of this?
Well, I don't think we know. Well, of course we don't know, but, you know, the one thing we can be sure of is that I don't think President Trump will let this go. You know, it's an absolute gift to him, isn't it? Because he can use this now as a club to beat not just the BBC with, but also all media with. It was interesting, you know, if you look at his lawsuits against major media organisations in the States, I mean, there are several.
Yeah, he's made some money out of it.
A lot of them have been settled.
Yeah.
So, you know, who knows where he'll go with that. But, you know, as a political weapon for him, you know, it's just red meat, isn't it? Because it just adds to his fake news agenda. Well, it justifies his fake news agenda.
Yeah.
That's what's so frustrating about it.
It's a gift for Farage as well in this country. You know, he can do the same. You know, all of the media is left leaning, so don't listen to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a gift for all of them. So, you know, the BBC's got a job to do, isn't it, in terms of, well, all of the press has, isn't it? But there's another argument out there that, you know, that this is a media-led campaign against the BBC anyway, because a lot of the large media organisations in the world see the BBC as an unfair competitor. So if they've got a chance to trash it, they will.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who think that's exactly what's going on right now.
It's a reasonable thing to think as well. It's like giving away all the content on the website that they do makes it very difficult for people to get subscribers to their websites.
Well, that's always been the case, isn't it?
We had that in the regional press.
Yeah.
Bill's right. It's it's seen as an unfair playing ground since BBC has existed, really. So they'll try and trash it. But I don't know. I'd like to think, to your question, Rob, Trump will drag the BBC and mainstream media through the gutter again. I think the BBC obviously knows its solid position and footing here legally. And I think the prevailing wind will allow them to stand above it. But it will lead to change and reform inside the BBC. What that looks like, I don't know, right? But it will lead to change.
Well, it already has.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It already has.
I suppose with the licence fee coming up, you could ask, is this the end of the BBC? Is this the moment where we pull the plug and say, right, okay, it's not worth the licence fee, they're not doing the job that they're supposed to do, it's time to give up on the BBC? I wouldn't like it to be like that, but do you think that that's something... Let's say Reform win the next election, and they end... I know. Let's say worst case scenario, Reform win the next election.
What could happen?
Partly down to Nick's help, and from
the 10 people who are influenced by this podcast,
and your vote. But let's say they win it, Farage will be all over the BBC because he believes it to be a left-wing mouthpiece, basically, and he will definitely want to close it down. And this gives him reason to do so, doesn't it?
Well, it gives, it's given him some ammo. I don't think this is reason enough to shut down the whole of the BBC. I mean, definitely not. And you go back to the role of the press, then, don't you? We whoever wins the next election, if it is Reform, and if he's still leader, if it is Nigel, and if he wants to shut down the BBC, I mean, well, good luck with that. I mean, he might want to change it. But, it just demonstrates why the BBC is so important, isn't it? And, Farage and his ilk would say, and they do regularly, don't they, that any journalist who questions their take on the world has left-wing liberal bias.
Yeah.
Well, that is obviously, excuse my French, bollocks.
Yeah. It's playbook number 101 of Trump, isn't it?
Yeah,
basically.
it
You
is.
disagree with me, it's liberal bias.
Yeah.
Fake news.
Yeah, fake news. So, I mean, that's why it's so important that we don't have any more panorama cock-ups, and that's why that balance and fairness and accuracy is, at the fundamental core of all journalism. Because without it, you can be as brave as you like. And we talked about bravery, didn't we, in our last episode? Brave journalists have still got to be accurate. They've got to be accurate and fair more than anything. Because as soon as you're not, you're undermined, and your bravery becomes almost foolishness.
Yeah.
I think the BBC, I mean, Farage may well hate the BBC and may well he has a chance to try and cause them problems in the future. But I think the BBC are an organisation. I'm not going to say they're an institution. They're an organisation, a very effective broadcast media. And I feel that what will have to happen in the future is that they may have to change what they do, right? Pivot slightly. Because I think they'll undeniably have less money to play with over the coming years. So they'll have to change that. That might come with their reform from their cultural basis. I don't see much beyond that, really, Rob. I think Farage could try and eradicate them, but there's still an organisation there. And so they'll have to then make money in other ways, which they're more than capable of doing, as they've proven worldwide. So I feel like they'll have to change how they operate. But I feel the core service delivery of news around the world will stay, and I think has to stay as well.
Well, we'd want it to, wouldn't we?
We would.
Or
Yeah, we would.
sensible man on the street would want it to. But I mean, there's not, at all levels, national, regional, and local. You will always come across politicians who would sleep much easier at night if there weren't reporters or the press asking questions.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's why it remains really, it remains so important and, should be defended at all costs. That's what Tim Davie said in his outgoing speech. And, we're going to defend or fight for our journalism, whatever. Well, he's right.
Ultimately, this is why I'm so annoyed with it, because, to be honest, this sort of stuff is what's getting in the way of. I hate it when people say that the BBC shouldn't exist and that it's biased and all of that type of stuff, because I really believe in the BBC, and I really believe that, generally speaking, it's still the least biased news source that you can find. But I'm finding it more and more difficult to defend them. If you look at their coverage of COVID, it was lockdown is the only solution. There is nothing else we will talk about. Colin Murray used to go on the radio at night and say, we're not having anyone who's a COVID skeptic on, or we're not having anyone who's a lockdown skeptic on. We're just going to have people coming on and telling us about their stories of how they're doing through lockdown, etc. And it was just like, this is so biased, it's unbelievable. That was the start of it. They were really clearly anti-Brexit, and now it's just kind of gone on and on
that
and
didn't
on.
Work.
Well, exactly. But they were, they were. And I do wonder, I know that it's the logical thing to do, but I wonder about their stance on global warming, where they've decided, yes, it's definitely happening, and they're not having any skeptics on about that either. I just wonder whether they have gone down such a path now that there is a group of people there who don't even question it when someone makes an edit like they did about the Trump thing, because it's just part of the culture. It's just another thing that is accepted. Of course, Trump's terrible. We don't need to think about an edit like that. Trump's terrible, so just let it go.
Well, I mean, it's either that or it was deliberate.
Yeah.
Or it's deliberate. Yeah, let's cut it this way because that, and I'll leave people in no doubt. I mean, that wasn't really needed, was it? Because
I suspect that was what it was.
It just needed someone to say, he said this earlier and then he said this later. There was some stuff in between. Did it lead to them storming the Capitol building?
That's absolute basics.
Yeah.
Of journalism. As you say, you teach it to your students, and that's the thing. You can't conflate sections of or take quotes out of context or.
I think what it smacks of at the BBC is we're going to talk about it on another podcast, aren't we, Rob? There's a lack of leadership at the BBC, and that's clearly where Tim Davie's gone. It's because actually, to be honest, the BBC is a very funny organisation as well. From what I understand about the BBC operations, it's Tim Davie isn't the CEO of the organisation. He's not there literally dictating what happens to individuals who are
the Director General.
Exactly, but he's essentially a corraller of people. He's almost like the administrator of those CEOs. You've got a CEO of News apparently now who obviously just stood down. There are other senior people in other departments. They are the bosses of themselves, really. Tim Davie, or the Director General, is a kind of a shepherd, really, from what I can tell. So it's actually quite hard to implement stuff in the BBC the way that we might do in a private organisation. And I think that might be something that has to change in the BBC, how it's run internally. Because it does need somebody to go, this is what we're doing.
It feels to me it needs to be smaller.
Yeah.
It needs to be a smaller organisation with less happening so that it can be run in a much more efficient manner.
Well, it'd be easier to manage then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, what a job.
Yeah.
Manage the BBC. I mean, it's clear from the report I was reading that there was something going on within BBC Arabic, wasn't
Yeah, I was reading that apparently they've been massively anti-Israel in their coverage.
But again, this a
really
sort of
anti-Semitic
department. I didn't even know that existed.
No,
and I'm sure lots of people didn't. But for some people, that's probably their major source of news around, and that'll be nationally and internationally, wasn't it? So it becomes a potent and powerful little organisation, then, doesn't it? I don't know how little or big it is.
But if it's not being administered properly, and they are pumping out anti-Semitic content, which is apparently what was happening, then it's more. So then their attempt to be inclusive in their coverage is the exact opposite. That it becomes something that's more of a problem.
It appears there's no attempt. If that's the case, if that's what they were doing, then there's no attempt to be inclusive, is there?
What I mean is that was the
Evidence of clear
BBC's attempt to engage with an Arabic audience, but by doing so, they've ostracised another audience as a result of it, which was always possibly going to be the case, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If it just feels to me it's too big. It's too big, and BBC Verify. They look at Bellingcat and they go, well, we want something that's a bit like Bellingcat, so we're going to do BBC Verify. And it's like, why? What's BBC Verify? That's another thing which basically says we're right about everything, and et cetera, et cetera.
Shouldn't BBC should be BBC Verify?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need BBC Verify. It should be, this is it. You
Yeah.
know? They do my head in. They're trying to do too much, and as a result, they're doing lots of things badly. They're not managing themselves well enough.
I think that will happen. We just talked about that. I think they'll have less coffers in the future, right? And they'll have no choice but to scale down and focus.
Yeah.
So it's the timing of all of this, despite how it's happened and why it's happened. The timing is almost perfect, really. And I look forward to how the BBC changes.
That's what I come back to. Maybe in the long run, it's a good thing in that it forces them to take a really long, hard look at themselves and come up with a plan for the future.
Big job for the next DG.
I'll do it. I'll be DG.
Apparently George Osborne's name I've seen.
Oh, it'll be some Eton graduate somewhere, won't it? Probably.
Yeah, I'd be better at it.
You're not an Eton graduate, are you?
No, but
I was gonna say.
I could do it, definitely. Yeah, you don't need to be an Eton graduate. I'll do it.
No, you don't need to, but I think you will be.
You will be. Yeah, I know exactly. Right. Well, I think we've covered all of that. That was very interesting, and I think we've
There's
got
other media news, major media news.
Yeah.
MTV.
What about it?
It's being closed.
Is it?
MTV is no more.
I didn't know that.
It's from the end of the year.
They haven't
Is
played
it?
any music for a long time, haven't MTV? But it's going to be closed altogether, is it?
Does that make you feel old? 'Cause
It does. It does make me feel old. Yeah.
When it first came out, 1981.
I'd say 81. Do
Yeah.
you know the first?
No,
video that was shown?
nobody.
I absolutely do.
This
It's
is
Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles was the first thing they played.
Does everyone know the second song?
Wasn't it Billie Jean?
No, that's my point. Everyone knows what the first song is.
Is that right? It was the Buggles.
It was. It was the Buggles,
First
yeah.
one was Buggles, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, Video Killed the Radio Star. Obviously.
I suspect Dire Straits was in there somewhere, but
Dire Straits didn't come along until a bit later with videos. Brothers in Arms was when they started making videos, and that was well after the start of MTV.
Yeah, and they had their song, was it Money for Nothing, that actually featured MTV as part of the lyric, didn't it?
Yeah.
So
Cynical marketing ploy by
exactly,
Mark
yeah,
Knopfler.
yeah.
Anyway, great. We've got slightly off the point. So I think probably we've exhausted the BBC and solved all of their problems. Well done us. So we will be back in a week's time with an episode about are the political leaders of our time doing a good job in managing the press? And we'll be talking about some of the political leaders from the past as well. So in the meantime, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
And me.